You are surrounded! Step out with your hands where we can see them! The voice, tinny and distorted through a megaphone, ripped through the morning calm as I stood on my own front porch, barefoot and holding a mug of coffee. My eyes blinked hard against the sun, trying to process the 4 sheriff's deputies crouched behind their cars, weapons drawn. And standing just behind them, watching with a smug smile, was the woman who started it all. The woman who wanted my land. But that night, the night of the megaphone and the drawn guns, was still 6 months away. And for a little while, before the war came to my doorstep, we had peace. My name is Caleb Hayes. Most people call me Cal. For 25 years I was a prosecutor for Cook County, Illinois. I lived in a world of concrete and sirens, a world built on a cacophony of lies, depositions, and the endless weight of other people's wars. I sent men to prison, some for the rest of their lives. I did my job, and I did it well. But it takes a piece of you. Every case, every trial, it chips away at your soul until you start to forget what silence sounds like. The Riker Corporation case was the one that broke me. A year-long battle against a legion of corporate lawyers that left me burned out and empty. I won, but I'd lost something far more valuable. So I cashed out, took my pension, and left the city in my rearview mirror without a single glance back. My daughter Maya came with me. She was 15, and the city had been just as hard on her as it had been on me. She needed fresh air, open spaces, and a father who wasn't just a ghost in a suit. That's why we came to Oak Haven Ranch, 150 acres of rolling hills, ancient oak trees, and a sky so full of stars it made you feel insignificant in the best possible way. The most important feature wasn't the sturdy old farmhouse or the clear-running creek. It was what it didn't have. No homeowners association. I'd made my lawyer check the deed, the county lines, and every piece of legal paper twice. This land was ours, a fortress of solitude, and for the first few months it worked. I watched the tension leave Maya's shoulders. I saw her smile again. Not the tight, polite smile she'd perfected in the city, but a real jaw-aching grin as she learned to ride the old quarter horse we'd bought. We fixed fences, planted a vegetable garden, and sat on the porch watching thunderstorms roll in from the west. We were healing. Our little kingdom sat in the shadow of a much larger one. Across the valley, carved into the opposite hill, was Sterling Estates. It was a monument to modern excess, gleaming white mansions, perfectly manicured lawns, and a golf course so green it looked like it had been painted on. At the entrance stood a massive billboard, and on it was a portrait of its creator, Victoria Sterling. Platinum blonde hair, a smile that showed all of its teeth, and the cold, assessing eyes of a predator. She didn't look like a real estate developer. She looked like a queen. Her world and mine were separated by a mile of open country and a deep philosophical divide. I had dirt under my fingernails. She had diamonds on hers. I had peace. She had power. I never thought our worlds would need to collide. Then the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday, tucked inside our rustic mailbox. The envelope was made of thick, cream-colored paper that felt more like a wedding invitation than a piece of mail. In the corner was an embossed logo, a stylized S wrapping around a hill, Sterling Estates. My hands felt grimy from the garden as I opened it. The letter inside was polite. Dangerously polite. It welcomed us to the neighborhood and went on to talk about the importance of maintaining the aesthetic harmony of the region. It mentioned that while Oak Haven was not, strictly speaking, within their jurisdiction, they hoped we would appreciate and adhere to their community standards. It even included a helpful little list, approved fence colors, regulations on livestock visibility, and a subtle note about outbuildings needing to match the primary residence. I read it twice, then I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. It was the most elegantly written threat I had ever received, a velvet glove wrapped around an iron fist. I went inside, sat down at my old oak desk, and typed out a reply. It was short, professional. It quoted the exact state and county property laws that guaranteed my autonomy. It respectfully acknowledged their position and just as respectfully told them that their jurisdiction ended precisely where my property line began. I signed it, sealed it, and sent it off the next day. I felt a small, satisfying sense of victory. A challenge had been issued, and a challenge had been met. For a week there was nothing, just the whisper of the wind in the oaks. I thought, naively, that it was over. It wasn't. 1 week to the day after I sent my letter, I was standing on the porch, enjoying my morning coffee, and I saw it. Hovering just beyond my fence line, maybe 200 feet in the air, a drone. It was sleek and white with that same silver S logo gleaming in the morning sun. It wasn't moving. It was just there, watching. Maya came out and stood beside me. "Dad," she whispered, "what is that?" I put my arm around her shoulder, my eyes never leaving the unblinking lens of the drone. It felt like the barrel of a gun. "That, honey," I said, my voice low and steady, "is the reply." It wasn't a toy, it was a scout, and it meant that Victoria Sterling's war was now at my door. Maya looked from the drone back to me, her newfound confidence wavering. What do we do? The old me, the prosecutor, would have immediately started drafting cease and desist letters. The new me, the father, had a simpler, more direct approach. "First," I said, putting a reassuring arm around her, "we ignore it. Then we document it." I went inside and grabbed my best camera, the one with the powerful zoom lens I'd bought for birdwatching. I walked right up to my fence line, raised the camera, and started taking pictures. Clear, time-stamped, high-resolution photos of the drone hovering just outside my property. It was a message of my own. "I see you." And I'm keeping records. It became a part of our daily routine. I'd wake up, make coffee, and go out to photograph Victoria's little spy in the sky. It would arrive around 7 a.m. and leave just after dusk. It never crossed onto my property, always staying just feet away, a perfectly legal and perfectly infuriating act of psychological harassment. It was a constant reminder that we were being watched, that our sanctuary had an audience. The peace we'd come here to find was being systematically poisoned, one day at a time. After 2 weeks of this silent stalemate, she escalated. The sound started as a low thrumming in the distance, growing steadily until the windows in the old farmhouse began to rattle. Maya and I ran outside just in time to see it, a sleek, black helicopter, the same silver S logo emblazoned on its side, making a low pass directly over my house. It was so low I could see the pilot's helmeted head. He wasn't just flying by, he was making a statement of wealth, power, and utter contempt for my existence. The chickens scattered in a panic. Our horse, a gentle old soul named Dusty, galloped to the far end of his paddock, his eyes wide with fear. The noise was deafening, a physical assault on the senses. It was a violation far more profound than the silent drone. It was Victoria Sterling reminding me that she owned the sky above my land too. The helicopter became a weekly ritual. It would appear on Saturday afternoons, circling for a good 10 minutes before disappearing back over the hill. I added helicopter photos to my growing collection of evidence, but I knew it was useless. A noise complaint against a woman like Victoria Sterling would be laughed out of the sheriff's office. She was a pillar of the community, a major landowner, a taxpayer. I was just some transplant from the city with a grudge. I knew then that she was trying to wear me down, to make life so unpleasant that I would simply give up and sell. She didn't know me very well. Every time that helicopter rattled my windows, it didn't weaken my resolve. It hardened it like steel. I wasn't just fighting for a piece of land anymore. I was fighting against a bully, and if my career had taught me anything, it was how to stand up to a bully. But her next attack wouldn't come from the sky. It would come in an envelope. It looked official. A plain manila envelope from the Tarrant County Planning and Development Office. My heart sank a little. This was a new front in the war, one fought not with noise and intimidation, but with red tape and bureaucracy. A battlefield I knew all too well. The letter was a notice of violation. It claimed that my barn, A structure that had stood on this land for nearly a century was not in compliance with a county ordinance passed in 2018 regarding non-residential accessory structures. It cited a new coat of red paint I'd put on it as an unpermitted modification. It was utterly absurd. It was also brilliant. An allegation like this would force me to spend time, money, and energy navigating the county's labyrinthine bureaucracy to prove my innocence. It was a classic war of attrition tactic. That was only the beginning. The notices started arriving weekly, each from a different county department, each citing an anonymous complaint. The Environmental Protection Agency sent a letter expressing serious concern that my small well, which had provided clean water to this land for generations, could potentially contaminate the watershed that fed the immaculate golf course at Sterling Estates. They required me to pay for a comprehensive water quality survey and soil analysis. The Department of Transportation issued a warning that the gravel driveway leading to my ranch was in potential violation of rural access standards and might require paving. But the cruelest blow, the one that truly set my blood on fire, came from Child Protective Services. The letter was clinical, terrifyingly detached. It stated that an anonymous report had been filed expressing concern over Maya's welfare. It cited her isolated rural environment and lack of structured peer interaction as potential risks to her social and emotional development. It informed me that a caseworker would be contacting me to schedule a home visit. I held the letter in my hand, and my vision went red. This was a line you do not cross. Victoria Sterling had just threatened my daughter. She had taken this from a dispute over land and made it about my family. My role as a father. That night, for the first time since moving to Oakhaven, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of official-looking paper, each one a shot fired in a battle I was fighting alone. I spent hours on the phone with county clerks, trying to be patient and polite while my insides churned with rage. I drafted detailed, legally sound responses to every single violation, citing precedents, attaching documents, and dismantling their absurd claims one by one. I was winning, but the cost was immense. My days were consumed by paperwork and phone calls. The peace I had come here for was a distant memory, replaced by the constant, grinding stress of a multi-front war. After a particularly draining phone call with a CPS supervisor in which I had to calmly explain that my daughter was a straight A student who volunteered at the local animal shelter, I knew I had to get out of the house. I saddled up Dusty and just rode, letting him take me wherever he wanted to go. We rode for hours, further than I'd ever gone before, deep into the undeveloped woods that separated my land from the next county over. That's where I found it. Tucked away in a small, overgrown valley was an old farm. The house was boarded up. The roof of the barn had collapsed in on itself, and the fields were choked with weeds. It felt sad, like a place where a life had been abruptly cut short. A rusty, faded, for sale by owner sign lay half buried in the dirt. Curiosity got the better of me. I dismounted and walked up to the dilapidated front gate. It was there, on one of the weathered wooden gateposts, that I saw the carving. It wasn't old. The cuts were still relatively fresh. It was a simple, crude message, scratched into the wood with what looked like a knife. VS always wins. A cold chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. Victoria Sterling. I pulled out my phone and took a picture. This wasn't a guess anymore. This was a pattern. The next day I drove into town and went straight to the Tarrant County Records office. The place smelled of old paper and dust. I spent the entire afternoon hunched over a microfiche reader, my prosecutor's instincts kicking in with a vengeance. I wasn't just a rancher anymore. I was an investigator. I searched for every property that bordered the massive Sterling Estates development, and I found it. A clear, undeniable pattern, stretching back over 15 years. 5 properties just like the abandoned farm, just like my own Oakhaven ranch. Each one had been owned by a family or an individual who initially refused to sell to Victoria Sterling's Development Corporation. And for each one, the records told a similar story. A sudden, inexplicable flood of code violations, tax assessments that mysteriously tripled overnight, lawsuits over water rights from phantom LLCs. The owners, none of whom had the legal background or the deep pockets to fight back, were bled dry, broken down. Eventually, they either sold to her for a fraction of their land's worth or were forced into foreclosure. She didn't just buy land, she conquered it. I sat back in the creaky chair, the hum of the old machine filling the silence. I wasn't her first target. I was just the first one who knew how to fight back in her own language. I was the first one who knew how to read the fine print. I drove home as the sun set, a new kind of resolve settling in my gut. This was bigger than my barn or my well. This was about a string of lives that had been systematically dismantled by a woman's greed. The fight had been personal before, now it was righteous. That night I sat on the porch, my shotgun cleaned and resting across my lap. I looked out at the peaceful valley, but I no longer saw peace. I saw a battlefield. I had successfully defended myself against her psychological warfare and her bureaucratic assaults. I had won the war on paper. A cold, hard knot of logic formed in my mind. A woman like Victoria Sterling, a woman who believed she always wins, doesn't just give up when one strategy fails. She escalates. If she couldn't break me with lawyers and red tape, what was next? The answer was as clear as it was terrifying. The only weapon she had left was force. I looked over at the house, where a light was on in Maya's room. She was safe, for now. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the silence of the night was a lie. The real storm, the one that didn't come with rain and thunder, was coming. And I had to be ready for it. The quiet that followed my discovery at the county records office was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a tornado. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. The drone was gone. The helicopter stayed away. No official-looking envelopes appeared in my mailbox. It was a silence filled with unspoken threats, a calculated pause designed to let my guard down. It didn't work. Every night I'd sit on the porch, watching the darkness gather, feeling like a soldier on watch. I double-checked the locks, cleaned my shotgun until it gleamed, and walked Maya through an emergency plan. A simple but clear set of instructions for what to do if the worst happened. She thought I was being paranoid. I prayed she was right. Then, on a Tuesday night in late October, the weather turned. The sky, which had been clear and full of stars an hour earlier, turned a bruised, angry purple. The wind began to howl, not a whisper through the oaks, but a mournful shriek that seemed to test the very foundations of the old farmhouse. This was it, the perfect cover. The rain came first, a few fat drops, then a torrential downpour, a solid grey curtain that cut us off from the world. The lights flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the house into a thick, inky blackness. The landline went with them. We were an island in a raging storm. I lit the old kerosene lamps, their warm glow a small comfort against the roaring dark. Maya was quiet, curled up on the sofa with a book, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She felt it too, the feeling that we weren't alone. And then I heard it. It wasn't the wind or the rain. It was a sound that didn't belong. A low crunch of gravel under heavy tires, followed by the sharp, metallic shriek of my front gate being forced. It wasn't just broken, it was torn from its hinges. My heart didn't race. It went cold and still. The moment I had been preparing for was here. "Maya," I said, my voice low and calm, betraying none of the ice in my veins. "Plan B, now." She looked at me, her eyes wide in the flickering lamplight. There was fear there, but also that same steady trust that anchored me to the world. She didn't ask questions. She simply nodded, grabbed the small go-bag we'd packed, and slipped silently down the hallway toward the back of the house. Our plan was simple. She would go to the old storm cellar, hidden beneath a rug in the pantry. She would lock it from the inside, and she would not come out. for any reason. I moved to the front window, peering through a slit in the curtains. Lightning split the sky, and in that brilliant, momentary flash, I saw them. 6 figures fanning out across my yard. They were dressed in black tactical gear, just as I'd imagined, moving with a clumsy purposefulness that confirmed my suspicions. Brute force, not finesse. They weren't here to talk. My first instinct was to join Maya in the cellar, to barricade the door and wait them out. But a deeper, colder instinct took over. Hiding wouldn't save us. Hiding wouldn't give me evidence. It would just make us cornered animals. A cornered animal fights. A thinking man sets a trap. This was my house, my land. Every creaking floorboard, every shadowed corner was an ally. I wasn't going to surrender a single inch without a fight. I grabbed the old, heavy 12-gauge from its place over the mantel. The weight of it was familiar, solid. I slipped through the house, my bare feet silent on the worn wooden floors. I could hear them on the porch now, their heavy boots thudding against the planks. They weren't trying to be quiet. They were trying to be intimidating. The front door splintered inward with a deafening crash. I was already in the kitchen, pressed into the shadows beside the pantry. I watched as 2 of them entered the living room, their rifles equipped with flashlights that cut sharp, nervous beams through the darkness. They swept the room, knocking over a lamp in their haste. I needed to know their objective. I needed to separate them. I reached out and gently nudged a cast-iron skillet hanging from a hook. It swung, tapped against another pan, and created a soft metallic clink from the far side of the kitchen. It worked. One of the figures grunted and moved toward the sound, leaving his partner alone. I slipped back down the hall, my mind racing. They were searching, but for what? Or for whom? That's when I heard a faint sound from the pantry. The heavy cellar door, rattling slightly. They were testing it. My blood ran cold. I prayed the old iron bolt would hold. I could picture Maya down there, holding her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. And in that moment of terror for my daughter, I felt a surge of pure, focused rage. I moved toward my office. If they were here on Victoria's orders, they wouldn't just be here to scare us. They'd be here to frame me, to plant something. My office, where I kept all my legal files, was the logical target. I was right. Peeking around the doorframe, I saw 2 more of them inside. One was sweeping the room with his flashlight. The other was kneeling, pulling a small, heavy-looking duffel bag from his pack. He was unzipping it. The frame up. I had to act. I backed away silently and moved toward the back of the house, to the old mudroom that led to the barn. In that room was a set of heavy pulleys on the ceiling used in the old days to hoist hay bales. The rope was thick, old, and strong. An idea, desperate and dangerous, sparked in my mind. I made a noise, a deliberate one. I kicked over an old metal bucket. It clattered loudly across the stone floor. As expected, one of the men from the office came to investigate. He stepped into the mudroom, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He was young, I could see now. Less sure of himself than the others, his movements were jerky. He was the weak link. As he stepped past the pulley, I yanked the rope. Hard. A loop I'd prepared dropped, catching his rifle and twisting it from his grasp. In his moment of surprise, I slammed the heavy mudroom door shut and threw the bolt. He was separated from his team. He was trapped. I didn't give him a second to recover. I burst in from the interior door, shotgun leveled. "Don't move!" I snarled. He froze, his hands half raised. He was just a kid, maybe 22, his face pale with fear in the beam of my own flashlight. This was Kevin Price. "Who sent you?" I demanded, my voice a low growl. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "The bag in my office. What's in it?" I took a step closer, the barrel of the 12-gauge unwavering. His resolve crumbled. "I don't know, man. Drugs, I think. We were just supposed to plant it. Make it look like you were a dealer. It was just a scare job." I saw the cheap plastic security badge pinned to his tactical vest. I reached out and ripped it off. Aegis Tactical Solutions, it read. It felt like cheap plastic. This is what you call a scare job? From outside the door I heard shouting, "Price! What's going on?" They started hammering on the thick oak door. The plan was blown. That's when I heard a different sound. A few panicked, angry shots fired blindly into the night. Then, the sound of boots running, retreating back toward the front of the house. They were abandoning their man. They were running. I kept the gun on Price, my mind already shifting. The immediate threat was over. Now, the real fight began. I found the satellite phone I kept charged for emergencies just like this. While Price sat on the floor, trembling, I dialed a number I knew by heart, my old colleague at the FBI. The storm outside was already beginning to subside, the rain softening to a steady drumbeat. The longest night of my life was almost over. "This is Hayes," I said into the phone, my voice steady, my eyes locked on the terrified young man who had just handed me the key to bringing down an empire. "I'm at my ranch. There's been an incident. I need you to send a team, and tell them to hurry." I paused, looking at the cheap plastic badge in my hand. "I have one of them," I said, "and I have proof." I stood there in the sudden, ringing silence of the mudroom, the satellite phone pressed to my ear, its faint hum the only sound besides the softening rain. The storm outside was breaking, and with it the siege on my home. But the war was a long way from over. It was just entering a new, more dangerous phase. My first thought was of Maya. After giving my FBI contact, Mark Riley, the essential details, I bolted the mudroom door from the outside, leaving my captive secured, and moved through the house. The adrenaline that had kept me sharp was beginning to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary ache. The front door hung from a single hinge like a broken jaw. A lamp lay shattered on the floor. It was a violation, a desecration of the sanctuary I had built. I found Maya in the storm cellar, huddled in a corner, a thick blanket wrapped around her. She was safe. When she saw me, she flew into my arms and I held her tight, burying my face in her hair, inhaling the simple, clean scent of her shampoo. In that moment, all the tactical calculations, all the cold prosecutorial fury melted away, leaving only the raw, fierce love of a father. "It's over," I whispered, more to convince myself than her. "The worst is over." Within the hour, the cavalry arrived. First, 2 cars from the county sheriff's office, their red and blue lights painting surreal, flashing patterns across the wet trees. They were cautious, professional, and clearly out of their depth. Then came the black sedans of the FBI. My old colleague, Mark, stepped out of the lead car. He was older, greyer, but his eyes had the same sharp, assessing look I remembered. I didn't present myself as a victim. I presented myself as a colleague with a case. I walked him through the events of the night with methodical precision. I gave him the fake badge from Aegis Tactical Solutions. I showed him the duffel bag full of narcotics they'd intended to plant. And then I led him to the mudroom and introduced him to a terrified young man named Kevin Price. As they led him away in handcuffs, I saw the truth of the situation reflected in Mark's eyes. This wasn't a simple home invasion. This was something organized, something with money and power behind it. The next morning, after a sleepless night of giving statements and watching forensics teams comb over my property, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee, the sun finally streaming through the windows. The FBI had my evidence. They had a confession waiting to happen. A normal person would have left it at that, trusted the system to work, but I wasn't a normal person. I had been the system. I knew its strengths and I knew its fatal flaws. A quiet federal investigation could be buried by money and influence. Victoria Sterling had more of both than anyone in the state. I knew then that I couldn't win this war in the shadows. I had to drag her into the light. I found the number for a reporter at the local paper, the Tarrant County Tribune. Her name was Sarah Jenkins. I'd noticed her byline on a few sharp, well-researched articles about local zoning disputes. She was young, hungry, and seemed unafraid to poke the bear. I made the call. We met at a small diner in town, a neutral ground. She arrived with a notepad and a healthy dose of skepticism in her eyes. I didn't just dump the story in her lap. I laid it out for her like I was presenting a case to a grand jury. I started with the letters, the drones, the helicopter. I showed her the pictures on my phone. I told her about the abandoned farm and the VS Winds carving. And then I told her about the night before. As I spoke, I saw the skepticism in her eyes morph into wide-eyed disbelief, then into the focused, electric excitement of a journalist who knows they've just stumbled upon the story of a lifetime. "You have the man who confessed?" she asked, her pen flying across the notepad. "The FBI has him," I clarified, "and they have him on charges that will make him very eager to name his employer." "Victoria Sterling," she breathed the name. "Going after her, that's like trying to sue God in this county." "That's why I called you," I said, looking her straight in the eye. "The FBI can build a criminal case in the dark. You and we can fight her in the light. She can't intimidate the entire public." A slow smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a fellow predator who had just caught the scent of blood. "Mr. Hayes," she said, closing her notepad, "I think we can help each other." The alliance was forged. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked on 2 parallel fronts. Mark would call me with cryptic updates from the federal investigation. As predicted, Kevin Price, facing a laundry list of federal charges that would put him away for decades, had broken completely. He sang like a canary. He gave them everything: the name Aegis Tactical Solutions, the details of the cash payments, the shell corporation that funded the operation, and the direct orders he and his team had received to frame me, ensuring I'd either be in jail or so financially ruined I'd have to sell. He confirmed the motive, and he named the client, Victoria Sterling. Meanwhile, Sarah Jenkins was a whirlwind. She traced the shell corporation to a P.O. box in Dallas. She found the registered agent, a lawyer known for making problems disappear for the rich and powerful. She even tracked down 2 other families who had been forced out by Sterling's tactics years ago, families who had been too scared to speak up until now. Then, on a Friday morning, she called me. "It's ready, Cal," she said, a tremor of excitement in her voice. "We're publishing it online in 5 minutes." I logged onto the Tribune's website and waited, and then it appeared. The headline was stark, powerful, and perfect. "The Sterling Siege: How a Real Estate Tycoon Deploys a Private Army." I read the article. My own words and experiences woven together with Sarah's sharp, incisive reporting. It was all there. The harassment, the frame-up, the confession of Kevin Price, the stories of the other victims. It was a flawless indictment. My phone started ringing almost immediately. First it was Mark, then other reporters from Dallas, then Austin, then CNN. The story was exploding. It was a wildfire, jumping from one news outlet to the next, fueled by public outrage. I stood on my porch, the same porch where I'd stood in my boxers, facing down a megaphone, and looked out at the quiet fields of Oak Haven. The air felt different, lighter. The siege on my ranch was over, but as I watched the setting sun cast long shadows from the direction of Sterling Estates, I knew this was far from finished. The war was no longer being fought on my land. It was now being fought on every television screen and computer monitor in the country, and I knew a woman like Victoria Sterling wouldn't surrender. She would double down. The public battle, the one she couldn't control with money or thugs, was about to begin. The publication of Sarah's article wasn't a pebble tossed into a pond, it was a boulder. The ripples became a tidal wave. For 2 weeks the story was everywhere. Victoria Sterling, the untouchable queen of Tarrant County, went silent. Her lawyers issued a flat, unconvincing denial, but the damage was done. The court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. The final act of our war wasn't fought on my land or in a courtroom, but in the most public arena imaginable, the Tarrant County Planning Commission meeting. It was supposed to be her coronation. the final hearing to approve the massive multi-million-dollar resort project that had been her ultimate goal, the very project that had made my small ranch an intolerable obstacle. When I walked into the packed auditorium that evening, I wasn't alone. Sarah Jenkins was there with a news crew from a Dallas station, and sitting in the back rows I saw them, the other families from Sarah's article, the ones who had lost their farms, their homes, their peace. They weren't hiding anymore. They had come to watch. Victoria Sterling stood at the podium, a portrait of strained elegance. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle, defensive posture. She spoke of community progress and unfortunate, baseless allegations from disgruntled individual. She tried to paint herself as the victim of a smear campaign. The room was silent, the air thick with disbelief. She was trying to sell one last lie, and nobody was buying. She never got to finish her speech. The heavy oak doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. It wasn't the local police. It was my FBI contact, Mark Riley, flanked by 2 other agents in dark suits. They didn't rush. They walked down the center aisle with a calm, deliberate purpose that silenced the entire room. Every eye followed them. They walked past the rows of investors, past the news cameras, and stopped directly in front of the podium where Victoria stood, frozen. Mark didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Victoria Sterling," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and witness intimidation." A collective gasp swept through the room. I watched the color drain from Victoria's face as another agent stepped forward and with a quiet click fastened a pair of handcuffs around her wrists. In that moment, in front of the very people whose approval she craved, her empire of glass and steel and intimidation crumbled into dust. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With the testimony of Kevin Price and the mountain of evidence we had, the criminal case against her was airtight. But I wasn't finished. I gathered the other families, the ghosts she had created over the years, and we filed the largest class action lawsuit in the county's history. We didn't just sue her for damages, we sued her companies, her assets, her legacy, and her very name into non-existence. We took back what she had stolen. 6 months have passed since that day. It's morning at Oak Haven Ranch. I'm sitting on my front porch, a warm mug of coffee in my hands. The old gate has been replaced with a new one, built of solid oak and iron. In the paddock, Maya is grooming Dusty, her laughter carrying on the clean morning air. She's strong and confident, a resilience forged in the heart of a storm. A new flock of chickens pecks contentedly in the yard. The world is quiet, but this is a new kind of quiet. It's not the fragile, uncertain peace of a man in hiding. It's the deep, resonant, and earned peace of a man who is home. I learned something through all of this. Peace isn't a place you can buy, or a sanctuary you can build with fences and gates. It's a battle you have to be willing to fight. Justice isn't always handed to you. Sometimes you have to stand your ground, stare into the face of power, and take it for yourself. I look out over my land, my fortress, my home. The drone is gone. The helicopter is gone. The queen has been dethroned, and Oak Haven Ranch is finally, truly at peace.